Such a beautiful soul, Maisha Browy, and I think it's well deserving my highest praise and the highest congratulations, two most sincere congratulations to our little sister Maisha Browy for winning the Prime Minister's Youth Award for Journalism last night. And what a deserving accolade. She deserves that. So we're standing by to speak with her because she is available right now. In the meantime, we're watching what's happening globally while we try to get Maisha on the phone lines. We're watching what's happening globally, and believe me, there's some causes that we have to pay attention to. My brother Kwame Pianki has been staying on top of things also. Thank you so much for that, Kwame, because I was totally out of it all of last week and leading into today, actually. And so much of the research material that I have been reading coming in from my brother, my good friend, my cousin, Kwame Pianki. So thank you so much, Kwame, for that. All right, so I'm going to come back to that, and let me go to the telephone lines where our colleague, my little sister, Maisha Browy, is online. Good morning, Maisha. So I already tell our listeners, you're asking for the questions.
Okay, man. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Kabul.
Good morning. Was that you? Was that loud scream? Who was that?
No, I think that was Shanice Gibbs. She was recording. Yes.
I'm sorry. I should be able to play that. I wonder if I could find that on. How do I find that online now? Because
I guess I could send it to the WhatsApp line, and maybe you could access it there. Maybe.
Okay, do that and let me see. Yes. Because if you
highlighting how crime affects children. Mm-hmm. So as I said, it's really about, we hear from regular people every day, yes, but what about these people who, they put them in one side and say, don't talk. And then you, Kabu, with this same program, listening to you on Sundays and hearing or you speak to certain groups that you don't really, Africa, people, Jamaica, yes. We know that we are from Africa and everything, but we don't really highlight it a lot. And you have done that, and I draw my inspiration from you as well.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Maisha. As I said before, I am really, really proud of you. Just watching this journey that you're on. So you started out at the University of the West Indies. Your shift majors along the way, literatures and English to journalism. And then, but you were reporting from UWI, because I think when you reached out to us, you must have been at UWI.
Yes. When I reached out to you, I was at UWI. I was an intern at a newspaper company.
No, man, you can go ahead. Was it the Observer?
It was a Gleaner.
It was a Gleaner. Right. Yes.
I reached out to you. That's why, got your number. I was working on a story about, I think it was a story for Emancipation Day or something like that. So I was working on that story, and I wanted your opinion. So I called you. Yeah, and from there I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sticking to the Cab. I'm sticking to the Andrea Williams Green. Yeah, it was so wonderful. And from there, our friendship, sisterhood, blossomed and everything. And, it's really great working alongside you, everything. Yeah. Wonderful.
Maisha, this journey that you're on to me, it is phenomenal, and it is, I pointed this out to my daughter this morning because I know that one of the things that this is going to do for young people is to motivate them. So you were in newspaper for a while. You moved from newspaper into radio. What was that shift like? What was that shift like for you?
It was good because, as I said, I grew up listening to Area FM, and I heard these voices. Natalie Campbell. I was like, I want to do that with my voice one day. I know radio is fun. Radio is fun.
You had your plan. You always wanted to be.
It's Area FM. I don't know if the lecturers were annoyed, but it was RFM. I said RFM. And, here I am. I'm at RFM. So,
there you go.
Speak things into being.
Of course. There you go.
Yeah.
And how important is it, that very point you made, how important is it for young people to speak things into being? And what does that mean, speak things into being?
It is very important. Speak things into being means to declare what you want out of life. So put it out in the environment, put it out in the atmosphere, declare it over your life. I want to do this, and I'm going to do it. When you repeat it, you'll work on it. You'll ensure that you get it. Because, people will hear you say it, and it will be a sort of them holding you accountable. So it's good to do that. Remind yourself that this is what I want, and I will achieve it. So... yes, it's very important. It's very, very, very important to do that.
I agree with you.
And, to me, in society now, we need to focus on positive things. Sometimes people say bad things about themselves, they make some joke, but I would say don't do that. Anything you're going to declare over your life, it should be positive things, good things. Yeah.
That is critical to Side of the Africa Forum. And we're online with my colleague, Maisha Browy. She won the Prime Minister's Youth Award for Journalism. Tell us about that, Maisha, because obviously you've been at IRFM for how long now?
6 years. We're going 7. It would be 7 in September, yes.
Tempus Fugit. And how did this happen? Tell us the process.
All right. So to qualify for such an award, you have to possess a national award and regional, at least one national and at least one regional award. So I have a Press Association Award and 2 Caribbean Broadcasting Union Award. So those would position me to, be shortlisted or to do an interview. So, and I have to be, the persons applying have to be between the ages of 15 and 29. So then I was nominated by my editor, Natalie Campbell. I was actually nominated last year, but I didn't make it as an awardee then. But there were persons, I would say, who did exceptional work, who needed to be recognized last year, and they were. So this year, it's my year. I was nominated again by my editor. Yes. I didn't give up. Again, you can't give up. If you want something, you got to,
keep it consistent.
Yes, so I didn't give up, and my editor, Natalie Campbell, nominated me, and, I was one of 2 persons shortlisted, and yes, I was selected, and my great work was highlighted. Some of the things which led to, as I said, my nomination would have been the fact that I have done stories highlighting, focused on human interest stories.
Yes, so, and I heard in the introduction to the announcement last night about some of that, including your focus and not just writing the story, but the solutions that came out of your journalism. Talk to us about that. Poverty, for example, and the solution that came out of that coverage on poverty.
All right, so I did a documentary about a family living in Clarendon. Trust me, their conditions was absolutely poor. No one should be living in such conditions. And what really, drove me to do it.
So, we're hearing, there's some rumblings coming out of Burkina Faso because there has been an envoy sent by the United States to Burkina Faso. And we're told in a report from the Burkina Faso's Ministry of Information that the envoy said that he had gone to Burkina Faso to renew the willingness of the United States to rebuild strong cooperation with Burkina Faso. I come today with a message from President Donald Trump, he says, which is to work together to build a pragmatic relationship based on mutual respect and respect of the sovereignty, respect for the sovereignty of each country. We can work together to face challenges and improve our relationships. And this is what he says. So we're watching that. He was in Ouagadougou at the initiative of President Trump. The U.S. Under-Secretary of State for West Africa, Will Stevens, visited Burkinabe, the capital, on May 27. Well, we'll see what we'll see. We understand that the captain, the president, Ibrahim Traore, did not meet with this U.S. envoy. We could see that in many different ways. Some say it's a snub, some say it is Captain Ibrahim Traore showing what sovereignty looks like. Both threats, they say they're hybrid threats and technological advancements, and so they are addressing this, cyber attacks and disinformation, and also they're investing in emerging technologies such as AI, robotics, and quantum computing. We're seeing plans on the way in Europe also to improve air defense systems, artillery, ammunition, missiles, drones, and other capabilities in cyber, electronic, and space domains. There's so much more. They have actually said that this is an urgent call to action. So EU leaders are emphasizing the necessity of immediate and cohesive action to safeguard the continent's future amidst escalating global tensions. Romania and Poland, as I said, I think are central to this preparation for a war. And we see, just recently we saw what they did with the elections in Romania. It had to be how it ended up, and how immediately war is at the top of the agenda in Romania. So these two countries are central to this preparation for war. And it's directly related to Russia, you know. Do not be fooled. As a matter of fact, what you can do for me is, if you're on your smartphones, or if you've got your Atlas nearby, or your Globe, or however you're using your technology nowadays, or your analog technology, just Google Russia, Poland, and Romania on the map, and look at how all of that is situated. So they're strategically positioned on NATO's eastern flank. And so we see a lot of investment in defense infrastructure and capabilities in those two countries. And this is for a reason. So Poland has dramatically increased its defense budget. We're seeing military expansion and modernization. We're seeing all kinds of strategic border fortifications through the East Shield initiative. Pay some attention. Then we're seeing also the support for Ukraine. Ukraine matters and matters not. Just watch what's happening. Romania is becoming NATO's stronghold. Well, it is NATO's stronghold. So the air base in Romania is transforming into NATO's largest air base in Europe. History of legal and constitutional affairs. In a little while, we'll be going to the phone lines to speak with my very special guest. He's coming up in a few minutes' time. And let me tell you about Dr. Kimani S.K. Nehusi. We'll be looking at the topic, reclaiming our ancient knowledge systems. He is a progressive African historian born in Guyana. Dr. Nehusi is an athlete and academic who lectured at the University of Guyana, the University of London, and the University of East London. He's known for his work in linguistics and ancient Egyptian linguistic dispersal, and has a study remit in African and Caribbean history and society, Nile Valley societies, research methodologies, education and socialization, African and Caribbean languages. His written works include From Medunetta to Ebonics, Ethnic Minority, Validity of the Term Paper, Language in the Construction of African Unity, Past, Present, and Policy in Mamamuchi 2003. The Making of African Nation, Africanism and the African Renaissance, Adonis Abbey Publishing House London. He's also written Who is an African? Published in The African Renaissance, Volume 1, Number 2, October 2024. And, of course, we've interviewed him before. You know, he's written the book Libation, An African Ritual of Heritage in the Circle of Life. And that was in December 2015. He's going to join us later on in the program in a few minutes. And we'll be looking at reclaiming our ancient knowledge systems. Interesting. I told you earlier now that my brother, my cousin, my brother and friend Kwame Pianke has been doing the research for the program this morning. He didn't know that he was doing the research for the program, but he did. And so he's been sending me the documents. Thank you so much, Kwame. But he just sent me, he says, and this is from a former Soviet Union officer who's now based in the U.S., who says the EU cannot rearm itself, and obviously a play on the word rearm, for the real war. It is still stuck in the warfare of the 1990s, with capabilities, or rather lack thereof, matching those 1990s views. So Chihuahuas will continue to buy expensive and unreliable U.S. weapons, and they still don't have the capability to move into the 21st century, period. There are so many others that all that has happened at critical moments. You find a hall, a massive hall, the biggest in the history of Jamaica, of weapons. And you find a massive haul of cocaine. You've never found, this is the biggest in the history of Jamaica. This is happening in Boscobel. Tons of cocaine. I mean, this massive haul of cocaine. And you have a plane crashes in Clarendon, and there's no pilot and no passenger, but a massive haul of something. And a container washes up on the beach in Portmore, and there's a whole lot of chicken, but all the air conditioning units are gone, and aspects of it that can store drugs. And then there is a massive haul again of weapons at the wharf, and that is reported. All of these things are connected. Journalism has not connected them, will not connect them. I do not know why. But they're all connected, and they go back to organized crime on the island here in Jamaica. International organized crime. It means that there is more that the system knows than they're letting on. There is more that the government knows than they're letting on. There is more than the JCF, the police, the military, the army, the politicians know than they're letting on. We used to think it was for our own good. Them know, man, but them not talk. Because they're working on it behind the scenes. Oh, please, give me a break. If that is the case, then how come we still don't know who carried in all the massive haul of drugs in Boscobel? How come we don't know who carried in the massive haul of guns on the wharf? How come we don't know who connected to the plane that crashed so and so? And more and more and more. There are many more. I just named a few. So we're always catching the guns, and well, not always. When it suits we, if we change the conversation, because we know them are coming anyway. As a matter of fact, if you listen again to my discussion with our brother Figueroa from Trinidad and Tobago a few weeks ago, you'll understand what's happening here on the island in terms of international organized crime and why we're seeing these weapons coming in. This is what we hear about. You see how many guns, over 200 and odd. I don't have the figures here. Correct me if I'm wrong. If somebody can, one of my producers can send me this story. I'm talking from the top of my head. But do you see what's happening here? What's happening here is that we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of weapons of mass destruction coming in right about election time. Elections are in the air, you know. How much gone through? Who carrying them in? And who running this international organized crime ring in Jamaica? Who are the principals? We have to ask ourselves that question and demand an answer from ourselves. Because there is an international crime ring mafia not far from Sinaloa, not far from the Hong Kong mafia, not far from the Turkish mafia, connected to Honduras and Colombia, and of course, Mexicana. Jamaica is a part of this ring of international organized crime, and this information is known. Don't let them dumb you down to fool you. They know more than they're saying. What is sad about it is that at the end of the day, it's we the people who will suffer. It's we the people who are being shot down in the street. Children who are getting caught in the crossfire of weapon war, gun war, gang warfare. When they tell us it's gangs, of course it's gangs. Gangs that belong to an international organized crime ring. This is the sadness of our situation. Do not let it go. A lot of other little things, conversation happening on the island that are just distractions. There's a man who them hired to be head of the FID. What is that connected to? Is that connected to anything? If there has to be transparency and the appearance of transparency, at least if you do not want people to connect things to international organized crime. And you cannot behave like an international organized crime don or mafia in a so-called democracy. It cannot run like that. So, Favor, you can't run the thing like a done it. It cannot be. You're sounding like you were born and raised in Sinaloa. It can't be that way. There has to be a very high level of transparency because our situation is what it is. I'm going to have to end it here, but we come back another day. Do not call me to tell me, say I said Favor is connected to international organized crime. I never said nothing like that. I said she has to shun the very appearance of anything that would make her government and her stewardship appear like a don or a donnet. Let me take a break. Yes, so I'm seeing all of that. Thank you for that information. $233 guns recovered and 40,000 rounds of ammo and counting from a warehouse seizure. A warehouse seizure. Minister of National Security Dr. Harris Chang today revealed that the count from the massive gun find at a warehouse in Kingston has reached a tally of 233 firearms. Chang, speaking at a post-cabinet press briefing at Jamaica House, disclosed the seizure includes how many rifles that is? 74 rifles and 150 handguns. Further, he disclosed the count of the ammunition has so far reached 40,000 with the count ongoing. they're really taking us for idiots because, and I'll come back to that. Let me go to the phone line. I think I have my special guest online, our brother, Dr. Kimani S.K. Nehusi, progressive African historian, born in Guyana. I think we're developing a very, very special relationship with Guyana because we've had so many interviews with persons who are actually from Guyana in the last few months. Dr. Kimani S.K. Nehusi, this is pointing us to something that Guyana has just insisted that it's going to be front and center in Jamaica. I think you are part of the progressive way of doing that.
Well, that's a very glowing introduction. I'm happy to hear it. I hope most of it or all of it is true. And I'm very glad to be on your program, Sister Captain.
Thank you so much for joining us. We did go through your introduction before you came on, so our listeners are versed and very well aware of who you are and the work that you're doing, also your scholarship. I want to start, though, because we've been talking this morning about Professor Ngugu wa Thiong'o, and we're going to be talking about reclaiming our African knowledge systems, and especially for someone like yourself who was known for your work on linguistics and ancient Egyptian linguistic dispersal. I'm sure that you want to make a statement or to speak of the importance of Ngugu wa Thiong'o to just a space where we're talking about reclaiming our ancient knowledge systems.
Most definitely, and I welcome this opportunity to pay respects to our recently departed brother. We say departed, but we know he's still with us in spirit, and he's always going to be with us in spirit. Mm-hmm. It's important to understand his work as a scholar who took a very important interest in being African wherever he went. And he didn't only tell African stories from the point of view of African people. One of the more significant things he did was to insist on writing in an African language, the Gikuyu language, which is his own native language, ancestral language. And it's an important point here because not only has African languages been disrespected by the people who've oppressed us, they've also forced many of our own people to see ourselves, and in this case, particularly our languages, from their point of view. So we disrespect our ancestral heritage, and we say that our language is a dialect, we call it all kinds of things that are derogatory. Well, our languages are important because language is people. A language tells you who you are. A language says, here is my culture. And we need to understand that. And when Ngugi decided to honor his language in that way, he did one of the most important things for our people.
Thank you so much for that. Let me quickly remind our listeners this hour. Brother Kimathi, and I hear you because I think it's a good place for us to begin with language as power. How central is language in the struggle to reclaim African knowledge systems, especially in the light of Ngugu's call to decolonize the mind?
Well, we could only completely decolonize our minds if we begin to speak our own languages. And I think here, the question of terminology, even if we do not return, or you might say completely, in other words, leave, in the case of the Caribbean, leave English or Spanish or other European languages that are our official languages, even if we don't leave them completely, we need to be very clear that the terms that those languages come wrapped up in are anti-African. And part of our decolonization would be to question and reject some of the terminologies that those languages come wrapped up in. For example, we got used to calling our ancestors slaves. Our ancestors were not slaves. They were enslaved Africans.
Exactly.
And when we use the correct term, we pay respects to them, we show that they didn't go willingly into enslavement. They fought all the way.
Yes.
But we also identify them as Africans. Now, neither of those two things is what our oppressors want us to recognize. They don't want us to recognize ourselves as Africans, and they don't want to recognize the ceaseless struggle of our ancestors. It's just one example of how important terminology is. Yeah. And generally, language is very important. If we respect the language of Jamaica, we respect the people of Jamaica, we respect the heritage of Jamaica, we begin to unlock a greater understanding of who we are, where we're coming from, if we pay attention to the language. And it's not because a language is not written that it is inferior. So we need to understand all of this things.
Language carries culture. And I know we're going to go to reclaiming the ancient knowledge system, but I think it fits right in, especially because we're paying tribute this morning in our own way to Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And he argues that language carries culture. From your own work, help us to uncover some of that, the cultural continuities, if you will, between ancient Egypt, for example, and other African societies through linguistic evidence, because I know this is your work, and you've done excellent work in this field, linguistics and ancient Egyptian linguistic dispersal. Help us to understand that.
Well, how much time you have? 10 hours, is it? This is a very powerful area of investigation. And I suspect that you're familiar with one of my recent publications that talks about ancestral land.
Yes.
And I think this is a good one because most people in Jamaica understand the question of ancestral land, although they may not be very familiar with the terminology. What I want to get at here is the way in which ancient Egyptians treated the navel string, the placenta, and dead bodies.
Yes. And
how that is important. I mean, if you read the ancient Egyptian language, you see they keep telling you in different ways that the navel string is very important to them. Not only did they place the navel string as well as placenta and dead bodies in the realm of the divine, but they treated these objects reverently, with divinely. And that signals that these things are of the greatest importance. And they disposed of them ritually. They were buried ritually. And this is what African people do unto today. In Jamaica, you know about the navel string tree, where the navel string is buried, and you plant a tree.
You're saying that this comes all the way from ancient Egypt. You're saying this is ancient Kemet. This is not, because this is done in Jamaica, right? This is so that everybody can identify the planting of the navel string. But you're saying this is a part of our ancient practice as African people, coming all the way from Egypt itself.
Correction. Before ancient Egypt. We tend not to know too much about many things that happened before ancient Egypt. The reason is that the ancient Egyptians were the first human beings in the world to write. They invented writing and therefore reading. So they wrote a lot about themselves, and we could read. We have more information about them than we have about most any other ancient society. Certainly, one is the great age that they have, their society. But we know some of these things come from before ancient Egypt. And that's something I think we need to understand, how deep in the history of Africa and therefore of the world this practice is.
Hold that thought for me, please. How deep in the history of Africa and the world this practice is. Let me take a break. to foreign so-called investors?
Well, I think it is one of the things that shows how important culture is, and therefore language as a repository of culture and an instrument of reclaiming and enforcing culture. Because we have been led to believe that our culture is not valuable and our nation languages are not valuable, we have lost possession of some of our most important ideas, practices, and so on, because we no longer understand the significance of these things. Now, throughout the Caribbean and further afield, wherever African people exist today, land ownership is an issue. And quite frankly, African people had been in possession of these lands for thousands of years, sometimes in places like Jamaica and so on for hundreds of years. So how come somebody else could come and get this land without the people who own the land having a say in whether or not this land is available? And these foreigners usually pay nothing or little and nothing for our land. That's the question in front of us. And that could happen because our understanding of ourselves, meaning our culture, has been loosened or erased. So nobody or not enough people understand the value of our land, and we don't defend the ownership of that land. We're usually bamboozled by foreigners and a legal system that is imposed by the people who did the greatest crimes against us and does not recognize our culture. I don't think there's anywhere in the Caribbean where ancestral land is recognized as a genuine legal ownership of the land. Mm-hmm. I may be wrong, and I will be very happy if I am.
We saw a legal. I think you're mostly right. We saw just last month, I think it was, a serious challenge in Antigua and Barbuda. And I think with Barbuda, we might be seeing. I invite you to look at that, Dr. Nehusi, so that we can probably have a conversation about it another time, because I know that there was a serious challenge to that ancestral land. And it's for me also to find out where that is right now in terms of whether or not how the courts have dealt with that and how the government is dealing with that, because people were stripped of those lands. So I think that is the only example we have in the Caribbean right now where is this level of challenge. Here in Jamaica, we do have a lot of cases in court, but it's individual cases for access to the ocean through land, of course. So that the very oceans that surround the island, which is Jamaica, is being blocked off because the government has allowed, and this is a policy, the Beach Management Act allows government to sell land and lock out the people. So this is something that is on the ground for us now, a very fluid and very active situation.
There are three things about that. One is we must learn the important lesson that if they come for you in the morning, they'll come for me in the night.
Yes.
And that people of the Caribbean need to get together to defend their common interests. It's not because you don't know so-and-so who is fighting a battle somewhere 6 miles or 10 miles or further away from you on this important issue of land ownership, that you don't have an interest in that person's case, because you may have a similar or the same issue, and it's just that somebody hasn't come for your land yet. The other thing here is that the question of beaches and ownership, common ownership in the Caribbean, is a very, very important issue. It's not only in Jamaica. It's all around the Caribbean that people are being banned from their own beaches. And again, it's the whole question of community ownership of these assets. And this is against foreigners who have been encroaching on the people's land, the people's right to enjoy their beaches. And usually these foreigners are people who have no interest except exploitative ones in the lands in question. And if people in Jamaica or elsewhere understand the question of ancestral land, then they're going to band together to defend ancestral land wherever it's threatened. Mm-hmm. In Barbuda, this question has been an open one for quite some years now, because the people of Barbuda usually understand that their land is ancestral land. Yes. They own it collectively, and they've been fighting mostly to preserve land ownership. And what we have here is a clash of two cultures. The oppressing European culture tried to tell us that land must be owned individually, fences must be set up, and so on. I'm not bashing that to a certain degree, but there are pieces of ancestral land that are very important to our people. And we need to understand that that's a deep attachment that goes back for the longest while. And if we walk away from ancestral land, we are walking away from a most important aspect of ourselves. We're letting down our ancestors. We're allowing people who have no interest in our welfare to seize important assets and to do what they like with them. So we're staring impoverishment or further impoverishment in the face because we're refusing to learn the lessons of our language and our culture. In this specific instance, it's ancestral land. But it's not only ancestral land that we could understand through looking at our language and our ancient culture. The question of the midwife is another aspect of our culture that we could access.
Hold that thought for me. I'll take a quick break and come back to the question of the midwife. And the constitutional affairs. Dr. Nehuse is online with me. We're talking about reclaiming our ancient knowledge systems. Dr. Nehuse, the midwife is where we let off, the importance of the midwife, and how does that fit into the wider context of the reclamation of our ancient knowledge systems?
Well, it fits in very well. Let's return to what we were saying, that although we find a lot of evidence in ancient Egypt is not the beginning of our culture. Our culture began as African people when humanity began, because the first human beings were Africans. These were our earliest ancestors. And the ancient Egyptians point towards the south, and they say that's where we come from. They call the south holy land, God's land, ancestral land, the land of the ancestral spirits, and so on. So they're very clear that the south is ancestral land in a collective way, and that's where they come from. The midwife, or the person who we call the midwife, also came from the south into ancient Egypt, because humanity moved from generally the south of Egypt up north or down north into what has become Egypt, or what we call Egypt. Our people's name for it is Kemet, or one of the names, the more popular one is Kemet. Yes. The midwife was part of that migration from deeper in inner Africa into Kemet. We know more about the midwife in Kemet because we could read the language. And there's more information, therefore, available to us.
I wanted to go into the information available to us about her, Dr. Nehuse, but can you back up a bit to say, when you talk about the migration, what areas are you looking at?
Well, we're looking at the Nile Great Lakes region, or the Great Lakes region of what is called the Nile River. Now, our ancestors then call it the Nile. They call it the Happy River. So higher up towards the interior, the center of Africa, is where the ancient Egyptians said they come from. There is some land around Uganda and the DRC today. They call that area the Mountains of the Moon. And the ancient Egyptians say that that's one of the places that they come from. So we know that also that migration happens generally from south to north, following the flow of the river in East Africa, ancient East Africa. We also know that there were people who were attracted to the Nile Valley, that in what became ancient Egypt at a certain point in time when the Sahara started to dry up. So people from the north, what is today North Africa, from East Africa, from Southern Africa, more and more people were drawn into that area. And all of these were African people. There was nobody else around at the point in time we were talking about. So that's how Egypt was peopled substantially. Later on, there were other migrations. So a lot of the knowledge, generally the culture of ancient Egypt, was culture that came predominantly from the south of the country. And as I said, the ancient Egyptians valued the south. There are so many instances in which you see that they believe, they recognize the south to be valuable, holy land, ancestral land, and so on. And a lot of the culture was taken by migrating people. You don't leave your culture behind when you migrate. And the figure of the community midwife is one of those figures that migrated with those early migrants from the south into what became Kenya. Of course, there was transformation taking place in terms of what she did and usually how she did it. But one of the most intriguing things for me is the way in which we could recognize that ancient ancestral figure in the communities in Africa and Africa abroad today. And if we're going to talk about Jamaica in that specific regard, let me just say that I would encourage people to look at Mary Seacole. I hope people in Jamaica especially would recognize Mary Seacole.
I'm sure they do.
Good. I'm glad about this. She is the worthwhile rival of Florence Nightingale. And here's something about Mary Seacole. She didn't go to any white academy to learn about medicine and so on. Where did she get it from? It's most likely her mother or her grandmother. And this leads us into the very, very ancient way of intergenerational transmission of knowledge and skills in Africa. This is the indigenous knowledge system, where in order to become something, in this case, the village midwife, you had to go through an extensive period of training and observation. You didn't just turn up one day and decide that you're going to be this. Our people had systems of control. It's similar to the university system. Actually, the first universities in the world were organized by African people in Kenya. So we knew about systems of control, quality control, and you learned to be a midwife by being an apprentice to an outstanding midwife. And you learned the knowledge, the skills, the trade, if you might say it that way, by practicing under the jurisdiction of such a person. Today, in communities, African communities around the world, that figure still exists, although she's under pressure because African culture is under pressure. But there are a couple of things I want to say about that midwife.
Yes.
And one of these things is some of the knowledge that she passed on from that indigenous knowledge system is still with us. This is a person who knew how to deliver babies, who knew what was wrong. If a baby wasn't torn the correct way, who knew what to do if a baby wasn't torn the correct way, and various things like that.
Yes.
Here is something to be considered.
And you talk about the clash of cultures, and it's an interesting situation because around the same time that we started talking about globalization, we were at the very same time hearing that a village midwife was no longer allowed to deliver babies, and that if they were doing this, that this would be illegal. And so people became afraid. This actually happened here on the island in Jamaica. And sometime after that, we started hearing about the millennial goals, and one of that goal being to stop infant mortality, because obviously you're taking the midwives out of the picture. Now everybody was, being pushed into overcrowded hospitals, and people, babies are dying left, right, and center. We're still having that discussion here on the island about infant mortality and mothers, nursing mothers, and so on. So I'm wondering if you're seeing a connection there in terms of what's happening with our mothers, our women, and children.
There is a connection. There is a connection. And I think somebody should do a study in Jamaica, and this study should be replicated elsewhere. Let me start with this fact, or these facts. And I'll put it in the form of a question, first of all.
Yes. Who
delivered babies around the colonized world, in Africa, in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in the United States of America, especially southern United States of America, before this edict came out that effectively tried to ban the village midwife? It was that village midwife who delivered all the babies. And we need to do a study of the incidence of mortality of mothers and children before that ban came into effect and after it came into effect. And I think that's going to tell us something. But the fact is that in all of these places, it was that village midwife using the ancestral knowledge of Africa who directed prenatal and postnatal care for mothers and babies. And when that ban went out, it was white men trying to take control of everything in sight. So what they did was use their political power to pass edicts that said, only if you go to an institution controlled by white men that you could be licensed to practice as a midwife. Happened in southern United States just over 120 years ago. It happened elsewhere. And our attempts at understanding ourselves and dealing effectively with the questions of the present rest substantially upon our understanding of what our history is. And I want to give a couple of examples of how important the ancestral knowledge of our people is, the indigenous knowledge system. We don't have time to go deeply into this because I would like to take a couple of years to explain in detail this kind of thing. But I'll give two examples. One is something that most Jamaicans over a certain age know about. During the long holidays, usually the long holidays, our parents or grandparents would dose all the children off with purgatives. You had to drink your castor oil and that kind of thing.
We call it washout.
And it's
herb and senna.
Yes, clean me out.
Herb, senna, and salt.
Right. Yes.
Yes.
Well, this is ancestral knowledge.
Yes.
And today, certain people in North America and elsewhere, they do the same kind of thing. And you know what they call it? Colon cleanser. And nobody says we got this from African ancestral knowledge.
Yes.
Nobody says that.
Yes. Yes.
And that's only one.
Yes.
Here's another piece of history that shines light on what we're talking about. The practice and understanding of vaccination was introduced to North America by an enslaved African man. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of information about it and how it happened and so on. Mm-hmm. But people rarely ask the question, where did this guy get this knowledge from? Mm-hmm. It wasn't knowledge that was common in North America among white people. So where did he get it from? And furthermore, what does this say about African ancestral knowledge? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They didn't possess that knowledge in isolation from other medical knowledge. We know that Africans thousands of years ago in Kemet, ancient Egypt, were practicing brain surgery. You don't get to the point of practicing brain surgery if you don't know quite a lot of medicine. And we know from reading even some of the European books, for example, Herodotus. Not only Herodotus, but also Homer. Mm-hmm. We know that the ancient Egyptians were respected throughout the ancient world for their medical knowledge. We could go deeply into this. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that our people had advanced knowledge, ancestral knowledge, in all areas, not only in medicine. But we're dealing with the figure of the midwife, and she represented that knowledge. Other people have decided to cut off African culture, to demonize African culture. And it's got to the point now where the controls have been loosened because, for example, if you practice what is called Obeah today, which has been banned by Europeans, you could be put in jail. So all kinds of imposters, people who had no training, people who didn't go through the ancestral apprenticeships and so on of our people, could come up and pose as an Obeah man or Obeah people. What was Obeah? Obeah was part of what we might call psychology in Africa. It wasn't exactly psychology because our people didn't compartmentalize knowledge and the practice of knowledge in that way. But we could safely say that Obeah involved psychology and spirituality. Spirituality was part of everything our people did because we had such a deep understanding of people and things. But that's another story. The fact is that if any one of us decide that we're going to put a table with a white cloth, candles, and incense by the roadside and we start preaching or whatever, many of our own people will look down upon us and they say, Kimani and others walk in Obeah. Yeah. But those very people would go to a church and see the priest in the church doing the identical things. And it won't enter their minds that those people are doing something bad. And here's a further kicker, as we would say. Europeans got the practice of incense and so on from African people. All of those practices, fact is, much of the Bible comes from Africa, not the cruel practices that Europeans have sought to impose with it, but lots of the things, the Ziktikas, it's African rituals. The whole notion of resurrection and so on, we don't have time to go into that. But this is part of African ancestral knowledge, alienated by other people, stolen by them, if we might use that word, and they don't want to admit that is part of African ancestral knowledge.
We're going to take a break, Dr. Kibatsi. You know, Kimani, we're going to have, right after you actually, Professor Clinton Hutton will come on to talk about some of these very issues that you just raised, especially pertaining to Obeah, because the Obeah Act is being challenged in Jamaica now, of course, led by Professor Clinton Hutton with attorney at law Bert Samuels, and this is something that we've been talking about in this space. But in the wider context of reclaiming our ancient knowledge systems, I think this falls directly within that. But let me take a break and come back. Husi is on the line. Dr. Kimani is looking at, we're discussing reclaiming our ancient knowledge systems. We're talking about Nile Valley civilizations and other knowledge systems. But Dr. Husi, we have just about 3 to 4 minutes left in this very engaging conversation. So many responses coming in from our listeners, but I really need to read this one to you because my brother Kwame Pianke says, if I remember correctly, had Shepsut carried her placenta with her on her expedition to Punt. Is that your recollection, Dr. Kimani, Dr. Nehusi?
No, I don't recall that, and it doesn't mean that it's untrue. I don't have all the details of Hatshepsut's expedition, but it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yes, it sounds,
especially in light of
true.
what we've been talking.
Yes, I've heard that before, but it's very interesting, isn't it? Because it speaks again to the importance of the placenta and she being the king or the pharaoh, if you will, at the time. With just a few minutes that we have left, I want to wrap, but basically probably with you looking, because we talk about reclamation and what does this mean for the diaspora? How do you see Caribbean people, ascendants of enslaved Africans participating in and contributing to this awakening of reclaiming?
Well, I think it's straightforward. First of all, we need to consciously organize ourselves to reclaim our ancient knowledge system. We need to do this through promoting consciousness and understanding of the importance, the significance of that system. I think governments need to step in and aid this. We have history departments. History departments should be properly concerned with this attempt to reclaim ancestral knowledge. We cannot be all we think we could be or know we could be if we don't know who we are, if we don't know our history. Right now, most people in the Caribbean are doing something that is the equivalent of reading a book that has 30 chapters, and we begin at chapter 27. And we think we know the whole story. The history of African people is the longest history in the world.
Yes.
It began thousands of years ago. We have been accumulating, organizing, and passing on knowledge uninterrupted from most of that time.
Yes.
The interruption of our journey happened relatively recently, a couple 100 years ago in terms of the Europeans and 1,500 years ago from Arabs. But a lot is there to be reclaimed. Right now, throughout Africa, there are village midwives who are under pressure, but they carry this ancestral knowledge. It's organized under Sangomas, for example, in Azania, South Africa. So we need to organize to deliberately reclaim this ancestral knowledge. A lot of it is available, even among us in the communities abroad. So we need to change attitudes and we need to deliberately organize this.
And
let me give one fact. Go ahead.
I'm saying, and why is it important to reclaim?
Well, there are several reasons. The first one I could think about is that if we don't reclaim knowledge of ourselves, we will be in the position that Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, warned us about. A people without knowledge of itself, its past, will be like a tree without roots.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that goes back to what the ancient Egyptians talk about.
Yes.
The people who are not rooted, we're Novarians. We don't know ourselves, and if you don't know yourself, you wouldn't know what your real interests are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know what your real interests are, you cannot defend them or promote them. So we need to know about ourselves. I'm not saying we must know, each one of us must know every detail, but among us, we must possess the entirety of our story.
Yeah.
That's one. Two, I hope I have demonstrated that ancestral knowledge is valuable.
Yes.
Practically valuable.
Yes.
We talk about the purgatives. We talk about the beginning of vaccination in North America. There are many other knowledge and practices. Oh, yeah, I talked about
Midwives.
Obeah as psychology. You know, our people understood from Jump Street that the condition of a patient's mind is an important factor in the healing process. That's Obeah. Well, Obeah is more than that. We talked about the midwife, as you're reminding me. So this, I mean, in this short conversation, look how much we've come up with. So all of this is a demonstration of the importance of ancestral knowledge. And let us remind ourselves that African people were conducting the knowledge industry for thousands of years before Europeans appeared on the stage of history. It's just about 100 years ago that Europeans began to understand the importance of the mind in the healing process, the importance of washing hands before you perform operations, and so on and so forth.
We're going to have to ask you to come back. Let me give you... go ahead and finish that sentence.
No, I'll be happy to come back.
Yeah, we'll definitely ask
I'll
you to
wait
come
for
back.
your comment.
And I want you to continue on this trend, because I think this is pretty important for us. One of the things that we're noticing here on the island, more than ever before, our children are sick. Our children are ill. We have diabetes, hypertension, all kinds of lifestyle diseases among our children. And it takes me back to what you referenced just now, that purge, that washout, we call it in Jamaica, that we had to get once every year. But we're totally out of time. My brother, my beloved brother, Dr. Kimani Nehusi, thank you so much. So enlightening, this conversation this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sister Kabu, for giving me the opportunity to contribute to your program.
Anytime, and we'll invite you back, I'm sure.
I'll wait for your invitation.
Okay, Dr. Kimani there, Nehusi. This is so practical, this conversation that we had with him, because we can identify with almost everything he said in terms of what we've stopped doing and how that has impacted just our livelihood, our economics, our health, everything. So we're going to pick up back with him another time. Listen up. Top draw dollars, pick 2, pick 3, pick 4. Hot pick and cash pot early bird draws coming up next. Time on Ira FM is 8:29 and 30 seconds, 25 seconds. So we're standing by. And we're going to go to my next very special guest online, Professor Clinton Hutton. Just before we do that, though, just to remind you of the topic of the conversation, we're going to be looking at the Obeah Act and the challenges, the constitutional challenge that has been brought. On Friday, the 16th of May, you'll recall that Bert Samuels, attorney and partner of Knight, Jr. and Samuels, on the instructions of Professor Clinton Hutton, Professor of Caribbean Philosophy, Culture and Cultural Aesthetics at the Michael College and Michael University, and Michael is not connected to that, but this is just to tell you who Professor Hutton is. Well, he filed a claim in the Supreme Court challenging several sections of the 1898 Obeah Act, which criminalizes the practice of Obeah. And this action as you heard from Bert Samuels many times in this space, more than overdue. They need to seek, he said, to remove this law. To seek to remove this law was deeply influenced by the sentencing of O'Shawn Grant in the Montego Bay St. James Parish Court on April 24, 2025. The claim challenges 7 sections of the Obeah Act, that is sections 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 12. And Professor Clinton Hutton's sworn affidavit provides key evidence relating to African spirituality retention being Obeah. The claim was served on the Attorney General on Monday, May 19, and we spoke with Bert last week, so you understand there was another development where a letter was sent asking for it to be expedited if possible. So, online, Professor Clinton Hutton joins me. Professor Clinton Hutton, long time, but welcome to the space.
Yes, greetings, Cabo, greetings.
I remember the days when we used to sit in St. Thomas. Yes.
And by the way, St. Thomas.
Yes.
The Morant Bay uprising, from the point of view of the authorities, was inspired by Obeah.
There you go. Tell us about that quickly, because let's just go right there.
All right, and they are documented. These are things that are documented. The Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Morant Bay, what they call the Morant Bay Rebellion, which inquiry started early in 1866, concluded amongst evidence that this thing was caused by Obeahism. Right? And people were executed for that.
Yes.
People were executed for what they call Obeahism and what they call Mayalism.
Yes.
In 1865. So the head of the military force that carried out operation in St. Thomas following October 11 uprising of the people led by Paul Bogle in Morant Bay was Colonel Francis Hobbs. And Colonel Francis Hobbs in his submission says that Obeahism and the deepest religious fanaticism had much to do with this rebellion, especially in Somerset, where Arthur Wellington bewitched the people. Hobbs was furious that Wellington, quote, had immense power and was much dreaded, and persuaded the people that they could not be wounded or killed by the Bakra. This is in the Royal Commission of Inquiry report, 1866, page 1129. Hobbs thus had Wellington shot and decapitated, and his head displayed on a pole in public, because Hobbs is saying that Wellington set himself up to be invulnerable to bullet shot, and I wanted to show them that no amount of incantation could prevent him from being shot.
Goodness gracious.
And then another man who was part of the Morant Bay uprising. By the way, Wellington was one of Paul Bogle's deputies. He was one of the leaders of the movement in St. Thomas in the East, as it was called then. Another one, by the name of Bartley. John Bartley was another supporter who was executed during what was called the Reign of Terror in St. Thomas in the East. Was executed for making images and he was also deemed to be an Obeah man.
For making images.
So what I'm also saying too,
yes.
by saying all of this, is that the making of Paul Bogle and George William Gordon, and before him, Nani,
yes.
Nani,
yes.
it's not Nani, Nani, national heroes in Jamaica after independence, is inconsistent with the Obeah Act that we still have on our books.
And this is exactly what I was thinking, and specifically about Nani. And thank you for the correct pronunciation, because this is celebrated, especially in the tourism industry, when tour guides are taking so-called tourists around. That aspect of who Nani is invulnerable to bullets, for example.
Yes.
In the very same term.
Yes.
And that this aspect of her, which would make her, by their own definition, an Obeah woman,
yes.
is celebrated in
yes.
in the Jamaican spaces.
Yes. But the first major uprising we had,
yes.
which was really a Pan-African uprising in Jamaica in 1760,
yes.
led by Tachi.
Mm-hmm.
He was denoted as an Obeah man,
yes.
a bush doctor, and the first set of Obeah laws in Jamaica came in, I think, 1762.
Yes.
2 years after the execution of that uprising and the execution of the leader of it, because his head was also removed from his body.
Oh goodness. Put that whole Obeah laws into context for us, a historical context for us, Clinton, because I hear you going there with 1760, because it's after that 1760 war, and you say this is a Pan-African issue that we had. We see this now coming in and being made into law, and it just wasn't just in Jamaica, was it?
Yeah. Yes. So. One of the things why the law came into being was to really prevent any such uprising against slavery from taking place.
Clinton, sorry, I missed an ad. Hold on, I missed a break.
Sure.
Hold on, please.
Yes.
Sure, so that we can understand how we come to be in this place so many years after 2025, from 1762-61, that we're now challenging the Constitution, because this is constitutional. Yes, Clinton, go ahead. You were saying that, so this came in 2 years after, a year and a half after.
Yes. To prevent any other uprising from taking place, any insurrection against slavery.
Yes.
So the act was to prevent the liberation struggles of enslaved Africans in Jamaica. And there are similar acts across the Caribbean after that, the British Caribbean, to prevent people from struggling to free themselves from enslavement. Right?
And how were people doing it? So that this was identified as one of the main reasons. What were our ancestors doing?
Oh, okay. There are many things, and I'm saying all of this to say that. In our education system has been failing our people in terms of silencing the struggles of our ancestors and their values and attitude, which played a significant role in the freedom struggles of black people to end slavery and to have a better life and way of being after the abolition of slavery.
Yeah.
And of course, those laws continued, revised, labor law, Obeah laws, revised after emancipation. So, what are some of the things that used to happen? One, there is a belief in African spirituality, African ways of existing during slavery, that and we have it in songs today, that we are our ancestors and our ancestors are us. That there is a bond that the African community or the African Jamaican community is made up of two parts. The community of the living and the community of the ancestors. Mm-hmm. The ancestral community is increased by death. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
And the community of the living is increased, and that is therefore, in that sense, is a form of birth.
Yes.
Right? And the community of the living is increased by birth. So as a little boy growing up in Jericho in Hanover, and they used to have wakes, and I used to ask myself, why is it during a wake, when you are sending off someone to the world of the ancestors, they do dance and sing songs that mimic sex?
Oh, they do?
I could not understand that. Mm-hmm. And it stuck in my head from I was a little boy until, as an adult, a researcher, a scholar, it struck me when I was writing a book on the Asian Revolution that the reason for doing that was as we send off our dear ones to the world of the ancestors, to people, the ancestral community of black people, we are also doing what was necessary ritually, that is, to increase the population of the living. Right?
The rebirth.
So that has always been, and therefore, in our belief system, we always have that relationship. And that is why my book on the Morant Bay Uprising is called Color for Color, Skin for Skin, marching with the ancestral spirits into war at Morant Bay.
Yes.
Because at age 3, I saw my mother putting food outside in the night. And it is then that I realized that we have unseen relatives.
Yes.
And then if you go to the rum bar, even to this day, a man order a drink of rum or a beer, the first thing he does is to spill a little on the floor. Libation. It is feeding the ancestor. Paying homage to the ancestor. So that at the Morant Bay Uprising, the link with ancestors is one of the ways of linking and communing with the ancestral world is through libation, through feeding rituals.
Yes. And so
feasting rituals.
Right, and it's interesting enough, because this, I think everybody who's listening, just especially Jamaicans, just recognized everything you said. There's so many different. We boil them down in a lot of cases when we discuss them nowadays to myths and legends and so on, and urban legends and so on in Jamaica, that really are things that Jamaican people have done over time, which is, as you said, with the rum, and you pour that on the ground for the libation. You have the ritual of you don't throw water outside at night because you're not going to upset the ancestors by doing that. You understand that? So there's so much. A part of what we do to this very day suggests that we ourselves, whether we think we are consciously aware of it or not, our rituals are also in connection with that thinking. So that so in terms of what our ancestors were doing at the time of in 1760, that had the enslavers looking on and saying, but these people are, and we hear the words they're using, invincible and invulnerable and all of that, that had them so frightened that they had to criminalize the very prayers and religious practices and spiritual and religious practices of our ancestors. And you're saying these are some of the rituals, but do we see these rituals over different wars? For example, obviously we had Chief Chechi. You talk about what happened in Morant Bay, and we know very well what happened in Haiti. With Bookman and them. Which is
I've written a book on that.
Yes.
I mean, before what preceded the Haitian Revolution were two feasts. That is now communion with the ancestors.
Yeah.
Two feasts. The first one, which was attended by Bookman Doty, a priestess,
Cecile Fatima.
Cecile Fatima. Cecile Fatima. They killed a pig, a black pig. And that's why when the Americans went to Haiti and took it over, they started to kill all the black pigs over there. Right? They killed a pig, and people, enslaved people from different estates were at that thing, Bois Carmen. That's where they had the feast. And that is what led, in other words, they were calling upon their ancestors to join them in war.
Yes.
Which liberated. The Haitian Revolution is a voodoo revolution, which has given to the world three important values of modernity. Those three important values are, one, the Haitian state was the first in the history of humanity to declare that no one should hold another as property. That is the first time in all of human history.
Yes.
That value. The second value was that a people has the right to self-determination. That is to sovereignty. That is to independence. That's the first time. When Europe was colonized in the non-European world, they were saying that some people did not have the right to sovereignty. The revolution in Haiti was saying a people had the right to self-determination. The third value was that all races of people are equal. And therefore, policy and development should be founded on equal treatment of all people. These are values that have been adopted by the founding charter of the United Nations organization. Right? So what I can say from this, what I can conclude, that for the people in Haiti, voodoo freed them from their enslavement.
Yes.
Let us be very clear about that. Voodoo was a liberating force.
And so voodoo was demonized and
it was demonized.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
In fact, even today it is used, even in Jamaica, interchangeably with Obeah. Obeah is voodoo, all of these things. And they mean it in a derogatory way. Right? Now, with the Morant Bay uprising,
yes,
it was preceded by a feast. In Stony Gut on October 10, hundreds of people from all over St. Thomas were gathered, and they had a tea meeting, and they stayed there all night. And then they walked down the next day. I think it was a Wednesday. So it was a Tuesday night that they had the tea meeting in Stony Gut at the center of Paul Bogle's chapel. And it was then that they walked down the next mid-afternoon into St. Thomas, into Morant Bay.
Yes.
And the last place that they gathered in Morant Bay was under a huge cotton tree. Luckily, a photograph of that cotton tree still stands. We have a photo of it. And in fact, somebody told me last night that the stump of the tree is still there.
Wow.
They met under this cotton tree before they entered the bay proper. Right? And that was the last meeting. What is the value of the cotton tree? The cotton tree is deemed by Africans, and prior to them, the Tainos, as sacred.
Yes.
Right? And a place where ancestral spirits like to gather. That's where Bogle had his last meeting before they entered the bay in front of the courtroom. The thing about all of this is that there is no narrative. There are books, have written about these things.
Yes.
These things are not in our schools.
And that's the question.
And therefore, what we have is a teaching which says that is white people freely.
Well, that is true because even my daughter is doing history in school, and so I'm going through with her the CXC history, and I'm surprised at CXC history because I'm going through the whole thing, and even though there is they try, I mean more than most, but what I found is frightening to me that there is so much emphasis being placed on the so-called abolitionists from England. Yes, we must look at what they were discussing in the Parliament, and yes, we must look at them. But what kind of, why are we centering them as being responsible for emancipation or abolition or freeing our enslaved ancestors? This to me is still frightening.
Yeah, because it is based on a notion that black people by themselves, their own agency, their own thought, their own philosophy, their own culture, could not free themselves, because those things that they possess, they were coming from a zoological garden. To quote George Hegel, the prominent German philosopher, who in the late 18th century and early 19th century argues that black people came from a zoological garden. They did not belong to the state of nature, and therefore the task for white people is to bring them into a state of nature. And therefore, slavery was actually bringing black people into a state of man to make them more human. Right?
What's interesting, I just listened to a conversation on one of these British media. Don't know if it's GB News, which nobody know really watch apart from me. But and they were talking, this woman named Malone or whatever her surname is, they were talking about, this is a very well-known journalist in the country, about colonization. And she, just a few days ago, said, but, people like to say that colonization was all bad, that what Britain do as colonizer was all bad, but it wasn't all bad. A lot of it was good. And then she was asked, what was good? And she said, well, education and transportation. And she was naming out things, and people were there sitting and agreeing with her. I cannot get over it. This is just a few days ago,
But that's all the reason why our education system is so problematic. Do we know the history and the contribution of African people to the development of mathematics, philosophy, building construction materials? Do we know the role, the pioneering role of making of civilization that African played?
Why don't we know?
They invented mathematics.
But why don't we know? Why don't we know?
We don't know that because what they want us to believe, that the genesis of Africans, their reason for being, was as a result of their European enslavement. And therefore, the uprising led by Sam Sharp, Nani, Kocho, these things would have been seen as not freedom. These are not freedom given actions. These actions were aimed at going back to barbarism and savagery. And therefore, African freedom is not really freedom from slavery. Real freedom for Africans, according to the Europeans, was not freedom from their enslavement, but freedom from themselves. Freedom from themselves.
Powerful.
Is real freedom, not freedom from slavery. Right?
Yes.
And so we have had that struggle, and that struggle continued after slavery was abolished. The principal slogan of the Paul Global Movement, one of the principal slogans of the Paul Global Movement was, in the same way black people were free from enslavement, the land on which they were enslaved must be so liberated for them to be totally free. And instead of a slogan, liberty of person, liberty of land. That's the classical meaning of freedom which we have abandoned.
The Morant Bay Rebellion, the Morant Bay War. So that is not yet fully realized in terms of what Paul Bogle and them were fighting for. Liberty of body, liberty of land. And thank you for throwing that into the space, because I think this is exactly where we are today. The last time you were talking about Clinton, we said the very same thing, you know. And that's a few years ago. Because we were saying the climate in Jamaica was we are, it, to me, resembled so much the climate at 1865. But nothing has really changed, and here we are. So maybe something has changed, which is with the people.
You know, and clearly. Part of the thing that has emerged is the whole struggle around access to beaches in this country.
Exactly.
Which is part of that. It's coming from there.
Yes.
So what I'm actually saying, the education that we got insofar as the European education, insofar as we make this education the center of our being, then what we're actually doing is perpetuating white supremacy without a population of white people to enforce it or to lead it.
What a comment. You know,
that's what we're doing.
It's a tragedy. Of course, it is what we're doing. It's interesting because that's how I started my program this morning, but you put it better than me. I mean, I was struggling for the words. Thank you very much for putting it in perspective. But Clinton, let us look a little now at some of the issues that you've raised, because we've seen the affidavit. We've been talking about this with Bert Samuels from a legal perspective. That's going to be raised in the courts, or raised in the affidavit. That is being challenged, because this is a constitutional challenge. This is a big deal, isn't it?
It is.
So
it's a big deal because there have been efforts. I remember on the board of the African Caribbean Institute a number of years ago, the board actually made a recommendation to government to abolish this law. And that was under the last ANP government, probably a year or two before it was voted out. None of the parties seem to want to touch it, even though there are very important voices within the parties for the abolition of it. They think some people don't think it makes sense, but they're afraid that there are people who will campaign from the church, and it's not all the churches are the same, but there are people who have threatened them that if they bring this thing to any conclusion, we will campaign against you, and therefore what will happen? You will lose your votes. It was the same thing when they were campaigning against the maternity leave law in the 1970s. There were some church denominations that were against it for people who were unwed, women who were unwed. Right? So I grew up in Jericho. There was a teacher, a beloved teacher, one of my loved teachers in Jericho. She's not from Jericho, but she was teaching at Jericho. And she had a daughter. The daughter called her auntie because she was not married.
Well, yes, that seemed to have been the order of the day. Back in as far as the 80s, we were seeing that.
Yes. So these very important things about human rights and justice, they linked it to some notion of Christianity that many Christians, I mean, there are some Christian leaders in Jamaica that I would have in my corner any day, any time. Honorable people, honest people. But there are others who would link the issue of maternity leave to the issue of marriage. So they are now having this moral thing and its relationship to Christian doctrine, quote unquote.
But we see the revival church coming out with guns blazing, big iron on the hip like Marty Robbins coming at you. Pow, 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 Clinton. If you
it's not all of them. I don't know the brethren, but it's not. You see, the victims have fallen prey to the things that persecuted them. If you go over and look at the newspapers from the 19th century to the 1930s and all of that, the 1940s and 1950s, you will see that the revival people were marginalized, criminalized, as our skin was criminalized, our texture of our hair was criminalized, our language was criminalized, and so on. And so one of the ways, if you are able to get some access to this power, this certitudinal power, it says if you're more like us and you repeat what we do, as the judge was doing to the young man in St. James.
Yes.
And he actually said to him that if you can't see it, you take magnesium and do this and do that and read these areas of the Bible.
In other words, that nobody can
Obeah, what she said, my Obeah is the appropriate Obeah.
Yes.
Yours is not. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense.
It's craziness at the highest level, but
it doesn't make any sense.
But Clinton,
it is irrational.
But Clinton, let us.
It is racist.
If it is racist, if we stand back a bit and to say there is in Jamaica, you just talk about the education system, you talk about the church. So there is in Jamaica a serious level of ignorance around this issue. And that there's also a level of cognitive dissonance in that how do people move from something that has anchored them for so long in terms of their ideology, their philosophy, how they see themselves, I mean, whether them Christians or otherwise, in contention with this very same thing. Even if you listen to the dancehall, reggae music and all of that, I mean, there is a contentious relationship between, more than anything else, two things in Jamaica. One is bad man and the other is Obeah. The two end up on the same side. And everybody else in contention with that.
Yes.
So to what extent does the ignorance of what the Obeah Act is and the extent to which this is depriving Jamaican people of their basic human rights in the first place, in relation to what the Chinese are doing, what the Indians are doing, what Christianity is doing? Is there an ignorance?
The ignorance is profound. Profound. It is deep, deep, deep. And that veil of ignorance, its depth, needs to be rooted out. Because no, I tell you, Marcus Garvey says that the most important liberating force for people of African descent is education. Garvey is very clear on that. The number one force for liberation from mental enslavement is education. And he went on to say after that, that the number one principle of education is self-discovery. Know thyself. Right? So we must be very clear. I have been invited to churches a number of times, and they are not the majority. It comes up a voice or two sometimes that you can talk, but guess what? Thank God for slavery, because by having slavery we're able to know God, Christ.
Well, there you go.
I've heard it several times.
Yes, me too. And but therein lies the problem and the kind of a resistance that we are already seeing from so many parts of Jamaica to the challenge to the Constitution, re the Obeah Act, and the need to get rid of this colonial law from the book. That this is definitely part of the problem. We can't rule those out. How confident are you? Because when you strip away everything, regardless, of people's feelings, the bottom line is the law. And I know you're here as a historian, but how confident are you that this challenge will succeed?
I think it will succeed because it has not been challenged in this way before. Mm-hmm. You can show that it does not make sense. Mm-hmm. You can show that it is prejudicial to people's ways of expressing themselves, mm-hmm. people's belief system, the issue of freedom of expression, freedom of association. Mm-hmm. You can show that things that they deem to be quote unquote Obeah are covered by other laws in the country. If somebody defraud you and scam you, you don't need any Obeah Act to deal with that. You have laws to deal with that. Mm-hmm. So that many of the things that people consider to be Obeah, which is really a European concoction, mm-hmm. that's what it was and remains so. That we know have it on our shoulders, mm-hmm. right? I mean, that young man who was burning those incenses and the rings, what that he said it was for protection. Mm-hmm. Do you know that in all our insurrections against slavery in Jamaica, people, this guard ring or something worn around the neck mm-hmm. by our freedom fighters was common?
Yes. Yes.
And now it is made illegal in Jamaica. Well, today in the 21st century. It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't at all to those of us.
It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yes, but Clinton, I'm still coming back to. So we understand that it don't make any sense, and obviously this challenge to the Constitution has brought all of this out into the open, and people begin to have conversations about it. But you say it's not all the Revival Church, but we see this brother from the Revival Church coming out blazing against this already. We are literally hearing people saying this is not going to happen in an election year, as you point out just now, because the church is against it, and if the church is against it, then they're going to stand up. So this is the reality on the one hand, but I am thinking that this reality is rooted in ignorance, and how do you move beyond that ignorance? I hear you point to Molomo, Marcus Messiah Garvey, yes. as one way in which to begin to address these issues. Yeah. So who's to start, and where do we start?
No, you start in the schools, mm-hmm. you start in the communities, you start in the church. I mean, there are progressive people in the church. You start in the church.
Which one?
No, man. In other words, you don't have to look at an institution in and of itself. There are individuals in institutions, in youth clubs. For example, Professor Rupert Lewis introduced the course on Marcus Garvey at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Yes. Without Professor Lewis's agency, that would never have happened during his time.
Yes, that was brilliant.
So you have to make the thing happen.
Yes, true.
You in your youth club, make it happen. Yeah. Because you have a smaller forum in which to reason with people, to show them inconsistencies with their life, the experience of their ancestors, and laws shaping them and governing them. How can you, unless you don't want to hear about your ancestors, as many people don't want to hear anything? Yes. Because they were the source of their barbarism.
Yeah.
So some black people have seen it that way. Marcus Garvey calls that mental slavery.
Yes.
I mean, in 1865, when people were being killed, imprisoned in the Morant Bay uprising, there were people who were arguing that there were some black people who have mental problems as a result of their colonial education.
Yes.
They call this mental problem black skin, white heart. That's 1865.
And now them turn black bull.
And it existed prior to that when I was growing up the College Rookford.
Clinton, can you hold a second for me, please? Attorney on the case. Clinton, we're just with about 5 minutes to go inside of our conversation. So I'm going to give you the floor just to kind of bring it all together to say, what it is that Jamaicans should know as they begin to engage with what is happening, because this is fluid, this is file, we're going to see things happening sooner or later. Whether it not it happen in an election year, we will see. But what it is that Jamaicans what is it that you want to say to Jamaicans who have a more open mind and are not closed off? Immediately they hear the word Obeah.
Yeah, the first thing is it shows the level of the lack of education. It shows the level of ignorance, and therefore this must be used as well to increase the level of awareness of people, of their history, of where they're coming from, the values of ancestry to our survival today, to being able to speak on radio, etc., etc. That's the first thing. That is education, and that it is for them to be able to influence policy in education at the individual level, that is individual teachers, but also from the community leadership level, from youth club, from the churches, from the revival churches as well, across the country. We really live in a landscape of ignorance of who we are. And because of that, it is. I mean, when people say anything too black no good, what in the 21st century? Tell me something. Tell me something. The other thing is that we are not relying on government to do it. We have done that before. That's what the board of the African Caribbean Institute has done. But the governments, whatever party, they are looking for votes. But this writ actually relieve them of that. They have nothing to do with that. And I'm sure that there are people within both parties who are and will be relieved because of that. In other words, they don't have to say, okay, we're going to repeal. Right? It is for the law to do it.
This is
it's for the courts to do it, not them. And therefore they are relieved of being having to be there to face the consequences of some people who will mobilize against them, even though that this is something that is so.
Well, it is true. They do have
so foolish.
Yeah, they do have deniability on this one,
right?
And which is good for them. If you
so it is good for them.
Yeah.
The other thing is to know that in this history of our becoming, that the first traditional institution and organizational bases of African people's struggle were these institutions that we call Maya, that we call Voodoo somewhere else, that we call Santeria or Lukumi, or Orisha, or Shango, our spiritual Baptist, our Mayombe, our Comfort, our Condomble, somewhere else. These are not things that are hidden, but we don't understand. We don't understand when, for example, ask yourself, how did our people cope with their enslavement? Because 100 million people were brought to Jamaica into enslavement. Right? And at the end of their enslavement, the population was 313 million, The population was unable to reproduce itself. That itself was genocide. Slavery in Jamaica was genocide. After the Taino people were genocided.
Yes.
Right?
If you will.
And therefore,
a Holocaust.
And there are so many examples of how this came about. I mean, a man ran away from enslavement in Westmoreland, and what did his owner did. These are the words of his owner. I won't use one of the words. I'll just start spelling off one. Gave him a moderate whipping, pickled him well, and made Hector SH in his mouth. Immediately put a gag whilst his mouth was full, and made him wear it 4 to 5 hours. Another example, the captain on a slave ship, a slaver, quote, to strike terror into the rest, killed a slave, and dividing heart, liver, and entrails into 300 pieces, made each of the slaves eat one, threatening those who refused with the same torture. Such incidents were not rare, and there are many, many, many others that have documented this. The point of the matter is, how did the question asked? How did our ancestors cope with these things? How did they survive? How did they resist? It was those institutions of Mayal, of Wudun, of Comfort, of Mayombe, of Lukumi, of Condomble that they created. And therefore, in the case of Mayal in Jamaica, this is one of the men who led the Cashier uprising in St. Thomas, in St. Mary, in 1760. He was being executed by fire. And this is what one slaveholder wrote about him. Slaveholder was also an historian. This is what he witnessed it. He said, the wretch that was burnt was made to sit on the ground, and his body being chained to an iron stake, the fire was applied to his feet. He uttered not a groan, and saw his legs reduced to ashes with the utmost firmness and composure.
Wow. 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 Professor Clinton Hutton.
After
I do not know what to say. I am
after which one of his arms, by some means, getting loose, he snatched a brand from the fire that was consuming him and flung it at the face of his executioner. I am suggesting that was Maya. That's it.
Professor Clinton Hutton. I don't have much more to say. I hear you, and when in 2025 you hear Professor Clinton Hutton weeping. When in 2025 our brothers, our fathers, our husbands still weep because of the treatment, the viciousness of slavery, then you know it's not half done. We don't start yet. Professor Hutton, ancestral guidance, because you've taken on something that is the work of ancestors. And we are with you every single step of the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Give thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, blessed.
Right. Do not commit to include an African language into the curriculum post haste. There really isn't any need for black people to vote on this island, because part of beginning to reclaim who we are is to reclaim our tongue. And don't tell me that nothing is happening in the African language, because almost all Chinese Mandarin speaking students are learning an African language as we speak. And there is a reason they're doing that. We are learning Mandarin because China is paying for it. This is basically where we are. But I'm coming to terms with my own emotions this morning. I want to go to my next very special guest online. And my sister is coming in at a moment, but she's coming in at the right moment, because she's coming in with the energy of somebody who has said to us that exactly what we're saying here. If we're not talking Africa, and if we're not talking about who we are as Africans, then we're totally off the mark. Nikki T. Bogle is online. She is CEO of Joe Higgs Foundation. Nikki Bogle, welcome, my sister. How are you doing?
Greetings. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very happy that you can make it online. And we want to go right into it, because there is a celebration of the rightfully heralded, as our friends would say, the father of reggae music, the early teacher of the Wailers and many others, Joe Higgs. And that's coming up shortly. So I want to go right into it. Talk to us about that celebration, that tribute that is being planned for Joe Higgs, and what that will entail.
Yes, so there is a legacy tribute on June 3rd to celebrate Joe Higgs' legacy, as well as his 85th birthday. It entails a number of different events, including a main concert of various local artists and international artists who will pay homage to Joe Higgs. They'll be singing Joe Higgs songs and giving tributes. There'll be food. It's free and open to the public. And we hope everybody can come to the Bob Marley Museum on June 3rd, 7 p.m., and enjoy the festivities and learn about reggae music history.
And it's interesting. Reggae music history is right, because my own experience, and I've been in this business for a while, that when we talk about the history of reggae, unless you're a purist or somebody who really is a connoisseur, then a lot of people do not go to Joe Higgs. And I'm wondering, why is it that there seems to be this, and we have it with so many of our founders, originators, but this forgetting of Joe Higgs in the general space?
Yes, Joe Higgs is the most famous reggae musician, architect of reggae that most Jamaicans have never heard of. When you mention his name, they wonder who that is, and they ask who it is, because he has been suppressed. He hasn't been taught. The music history hasn't been taught to Jamaicans. Now, worldwide, he's well known.
That's true.
But he's not known on this soil, and it is a shame, really a disgrace.
It is a disgrace. I do agree with you. I mean, and I said earlier in introducing you that he's known as the father of reggae music. Talk to us about the early life of Joe Higgs and how he came to be known as the father of reggae music.
Yeah, so Joe Higgs was born in 1940 in Kingston. And Joe Higgs came from Trenchtown. Now, Joe Higgs in the 50s was a famous musician, famous singer, well known in the community. And he actually released the first reggae album, reggae song that was pressed 50,000 copies were sold in 1959 of Omanio. And Joe Higgs decided that he was going to help others and not just focus on himself. Mm-hmm. So when, a number of folks came to him, some of them were not singing yet, right? They actually came to him to learn how to sing, how to write, various techniques that would make successful music. And among those, of course, we know our most famous is Bob Marley, the king of reggae.
And the Wailers, generally, yes.
The Wailers, Wailing Souls, and a number of other artists that he taught.
Jimmy Cliff.
Jimmy Cliff in Trenchtown, right? Behind his grandmother's kitchen. Right? And at some point, Joe Higgs had to flee Jamaica because of a song that he wrote that upsets the authorities. And so he was in self-imposed exile in Los Angeles.
And it's not, tell our listeners what that song is, because people were shocked to hear how he had literally to go into self-imposed exile, flee the island because of this song. Which song is it?
So It Go. When you don't have big friends. So named So It Go. Right? So people took offense to this song, and his life was threatened, and he left to save his life. But when he went to California, he taught another generation of artists. So he's beloved in California, beloved in Los Angeles. Because he has a number of students there as well.
And literally an unsung hero on the island here in Jamaica. So what's going to be happening for his birthday? I think it's for his Earth Day. Is important. He was also pretty. Is African-centered, of course, and understood himself as a radical Jamaican. And I'm talking specifically to how he redefined out of many one people. I'm not quite sure. We've heard this story from time to time. Not sure if you've heard it, but where he said,
absolutely.
Yeah, have you heard it?
I'm listening.
Where he says the motto "out of many one people" wasn't so much that it was out of all different races, but the extent to which one people, which are the African race,
it is. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it is. I mean, all the races are from one race, which is Africa, right? African race. And Joe Higgs was the embodiment of a proud African man. You listen to his songs and his teachings. Black Man Know Yourself, an entire album is called Black Man Know Yourself, right, including the song, right? He has a song called African Can. He has Sons of Garvey. Really, really embraced himself, knew himself, and knew his roots and was proud of that.
Yes.
And we as African people need to be and to understand who we are. If you understand who you are and you're comfortable in your own skin, nobody can tell you anything.
And this was a platform on which he stood, and that you see resonating in the work that he did. I mean, the music he wrote, Stepping Racer, and so many others. But to go back to Omanio, because that is, I think, globally known as the first reggae song. I don't think there's been any challenge to that. So it is such a pity that our young people do not know. What is being done, do you know, at the government level, if any? Is the government participating, the Ministry of Culture, for example, in the tribute to Joe Higgs on Tuesday? Is it Tuesday?
It's on Tuesday, Tuesday, June 3rd. And yes, the Ministry of Culture is in partnership with us on it.
Okay.
And we're creating a number of installations that's going to happen, right? Throughout after the tribute and everything, so that Jamaicans will know who this man is.
Yes.
I mean, Joe Higgs literally helped to create the reggae sound, right? Because you had ska, you had rock steady, and then through that, slowed down the pace to create reggae. And he was at the forefront of doing that.
Yes.
Which is why he was called the godfather of reggae. And then in an interview with Jimmy Cliff, they asked Jimmy, if he's the godfather, who's the father? And Jimmy said, well, Joe Higgs is the father as well, because there's nobody else before him.
Of course.
So he literally is the one who coined father.
Yes, yes.
You know, because everybody else knew him as godfather.
Yes, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm sorry we don't have more time. We're out of time. But this is something that I have committed to dedicate a few hours for this process, because I think that even in radio we can do so much more. We have done quite a bit on Joe Higgs in this space, I must say, but that was quite some time ago, and I think we need to return to that. And as we talk this morning, we're talking about reclaiming our African knowledge systems. The music is part of that, and so I'm committing myself to spend some more time, Nikki, and I hope that you're available.
Absolutely.
But just before you go, remind us of what's going to happen Tuesday. When is it open to the public? When can they participate?
So it's open to the public on Tuesday, June 3rd, which is Joe Higgs' Earth Strong. It's a legacy tribute. We have amazing artists, food, etc. at the Bob Marley Museum. It starts at 7 p.m. There'll be a shuttle from the Police Officers Club, so you can park at the Police Officers Club and you can take a shuttle. All of this is free to the public. So the shuttle is free, the entry is free, and just come and learn reggae music history and enjoy the music with some amazing artists that are going to be performing. Some veteran artists as well as some new artists and international artists. So come and enjoy.
All right. Sounds very good. Thank you so much, Nikki Bogle. Thank you so much, CEO of the Joe Higgs Foundation. And I'll be talking to you shortly because we're going to have some time to talk about Joe Higgs. I think we need to do that.
I look forward to more meditations, and I love what you're doing, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. All right. All right. Nikki Bogle there. Check out what's happening at the Bob Marley Museum on Tuesday. Joe Higgs. Let us just spend some time to think about the man and the music. It is a minute going up to 10 o'clock, and I know that Mr. Bigay is here, but he's not immediately where I am, and I got the feeling he was queuing up Oh Money Oh, and that's why I didn't even queue up anything, because I seen put him computer together, and he was on it like, you know.
What?
Did you queue up Oh Money Oh? We know you Bigay.
What you talking about?
Oh Money Oh, man, give it to me. Did you queue it up, Bigay?
No, I'm not. I thought I was in the conversation.
Oh, really?
No,
but Bigay, Joe Higgs, you know, so you know, there's a tribute to Joe Higgs on Tuesday. But you know, I was just saying to Nikki Bogle, who is the CEO of the foundation, that the extent to which he's unknown on the island, apart from with people like yourself, the purists and the connoisseurs, and people study the thing at a different level. That you can't just meet an ordinary person and say, like you say, Bob Marley, and they know. No, they wouldn't. And I think it's a shame, because you're talking about someone who is a pioneer, as Nikki Bogle said, of the sound of reggae music, who's known as the father and the godfather, as Jimmy Cliff says, of reggae music, and identified as that by all the artists who've been around him, you know. Well, not just around him, but whose lives he touched as a leader, the forerunner, the father.
Mm-hmm.
See the point I'm making? So you find it?
No.
You know, Oh Money Oh.
No.
Back in the day we used to play it, man.
I know, but Joe Higgs though is
okay.
Is a
grab a microphone. Oh, sorry. Yeah, wrong thing. Yeah.
All right. So I have not got the opportunity of looking very deep in my collection, because you know, spring this. You know, spring this one.
I know.
At the Kaboom.
Apologies.
But Joe Higgs is indeed a pivotal part of the reggae landscape. And all right, let me play this. Originally done by Joe Higgs, has been covered maybe 9 times by different reggae acts. The latest being Stephen Marley on his last project. In fact, let me see if I can find it.
Look here, things are going in here, you know. Look here now. Things are going in here. So the maestro, Big A, the mix master, is on the turntable. I'm just standing. Yes, I don't start waxing for it. Well, okay. So tell me for how long, pull it up, you know, Big A. Pull up, well, I may push it up. All right. We're back with you inside of the cutting edge. Well, Muta.
Gabo.
I think you have a problem, you know, because running African to cutting edge, and then by the time we get him straight, we're going to go into stepping razor.
All right.
Yes.
Mario, done by Higgs and Wilson. It's not a reggae tune, you know. It's what them called blue beat. From them time there, blue beat. That are before reggae.
Okay.
Right? And then now, the popular, the most popular tune where you hear Old Man Like Me and Biggie with deal with is There's a Reward for Me.
Muta, hold on there, Muta. Because I remember interviewing Edward Siaga, right? About, because, you know, he did a whole series on reggae music. And the development of Jamaican music. So he was on my program for that one. And he told me then that he produced Omanio, and that is the first reggae song.
No, reggae. Me did have all the man them who create the reggae sound in the studio one time, except Derek Morgan never and him confirm what I say.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, so let me ask you another question. The common thinking is that Omanio is the first reggae song, but you're saying that even though
the common thinking,
it is so.
The common thinking is 2 songs them give. Baby Y by the Cables and Nanny Goat.
Nanny Goat.
Yeah, it's a rhythm, you know. It's a rhythm, you know. It's like what you have trap music. I have minto, you know. It's a rhythm, see?
Okay.
Manual was long before. Well, not long before. Manual was before Baby Y. And long before Nanny Goat. But they used to call it Blue Beat.
Okay.
They have a label named Blue Beat too, you know. Right? And then now, there's a reward for me. He played 2 times. He played in a reggae and he played in a ska.
3 times because he did it acoustic.
Hold on, Biggie. I don't.
He also had an acoustic version of it.
Yeah, an acoustic one too.
Right.
Okay.
But the popular one was the ska.
The ska. You heard me play about 4 versions of it this morning, Muta.
Yeah, you play Marley.
Right.
Yeah.
And I played the Anthony B as well. I think Culture has a version of it as well.
Yeah, but when I say the idea of reggae is really upon the table because them never document these things over the years, you know, because they never see that something we're going to make or blow up so. Right?
So what does Stephen describe the first reggae?
They say Lester Sterling is the one who create the sound. The reggae sound, you know. I don't know if you know about Lester Sterling.
Well, I've heard mentioned. No, man, we heard mentioned because when I had Ernie Ranglin in, he kind of give me that background as to how the first reggae sound was done and who the people who were involved in that. Yeah.
Anderson, I think web name again, Anderson. Gladdy Anderson. Right. Gladdy Anderson.
Family was also a big one for him to Muta.
In terms of the rhythm, the reggae rhythm. To me, when we say father, is the man who give birth to it. That is when you would call the father. Like my father give birth to me. Well, the person who give birth to the rhythm, the sound, is him would call the father. You know, so
and that is still. I understand.
Take one from Joe Higgs, but Joe Higgs to me, which I didn't know him personally. Because, you know, I had this entanglement all the while about religion and them stuff. But he's a man who, in a trench town, he was like a father to hold it for the singer them and rise up. You know, but in terms of the rhythm itself, but you know, father to wheelers, wheeling soul, and the man who rise up in a trench town at them time there was really rally around him.
The fact that they considered him such, you know, that those who were putting out the first reggae music, or the first set of reggae music, that first tranche, they consider him the father. Jimmy Cliff said him is the father and the godfather. You know, so they can.
Jimmy Cliff said him as the father to Bob Marley. Came first came to studio with Beverly's. Him say him carry. Well, me not doubt him. Jimmy Cliff said him carry Bob Marley to studio first. Right. The musician them who create the beat, and the beat me I talk about, you know. Not.
So, where do you put Joe Higgs then in terms of his legacy?
Joe Higgs was in them time there, you know.
But in terms of legacy, as far as
his legacy is like him influence most of the big artists that were in a trench town.
Look here, big Mota, me tell you, so we're going to move from cutting edge to stepping ways.
All right. Mota, we have to dissect this further on another occasion, all right?
Yeah,
but give thanks for the input here, brother.
Yeah, the quiz are good
All right. All right, so little bit Mota. All right, go.
Mr. Biggie, me gone, do not blame me, Biggie. You look here, don't blame me.
I have no one else to blame.
Oh, me coming in.
I have no one else to blame.
Okay, we got to take the ad break. Listen, Time and I from 10:21. I'm taking a break.